Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Welcome, Pacesetters of Agribusiness, to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod, where we amplify voices from across the agricultural industry. We aggregate those perspectives and work to elevate our collective thinking around strategy execution. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. Today's episode is going to be a conversation I recently had with Matt Winsand, CEO of Burnett Dairy Cooperative in Wisconsin. Now, Burnett Dairy is a northern Wisconsin-based dairy cooperative, and they're unique in that they occupy two distinct lines of business. They of course buy milk daily from their dairy patrons, and that's for their cheese manufacturing facilities. But they also provide agronomic, grain, animal feed and health, and energy services to their ag services patrons. And behind this, the member ownership base reflects growers that are served by either or both sides of the business, and some of the voting rights and economic rights derive from that, which is interesting. I learned is a non-standard way that a lot of the dairy co-ops have been set up. Now, Matt is going to share his perspectives on unlocking value in the business as a non-dairy career veteran who has applied his relevant experiences from the Arthur companies, time spent in the farm credit system as a lender, and prior experiences with an ag cooperative, but not anything in dairy prior to his role at Burnett. We're going to unpack some of the unique market mechanics and value drivers of the dairy business, talk about some of the low utilization of structured futures and risk management products for dairy components that are actually available on official exchanges, perhaps underutilized. Talk about the impact from investing in the technology to measure and capture milk component losses and leakage within the manufacturing process. We'll talk about where milk demand is headed and how Matt thinks about diversification in an industrial segment that has very high capital cost to compete and requires investing into cyclical demand markets that are, of course, challenging for smaller cooperatives. Now, quick note here, in the time between us recording the episode and its planned release, Matt actually transitioned to an exciting new executive opportunity outside of Burnett. But both he and the Burnett board agreed that the perspectives shared here are additive to the industry and they're worth sharing. So despite some of the chess pieces moving on the board, I'm very happy to bring this episode to you today. And I want to give a special thanks to Matt for his contributions to the ag and dairy cooperative systems and his time joining us in the Pacesetter Pod. But then also a very special thanks to the Burnett Dairy Cooperative Board of Directors for greenlighting the release of this episode, really to the benefit of our industry and all of you out there trying to turn strategy into outcomes. So before we start today, a quick reminder to like and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can do it right now. Please consider leaving us a review to let us know how we're doing. Subscribing and reviewing the show is the best way you can support the program. Again, it doesn't cost you a thing. We really appreciate it. So with all that, thanks again for joining us today. And here's my conversation with Matt Winsand of Burnett Dairy Cooperative. Matt, it is really exciting to have you on the program this week. We've been doing this show now for over 3 years, and I have not yet sat down with a representative from the dairy co-op space, to my best recollection. And so while I'm certainly eager to get your perspectives on growth and strategy of the segment and how you think about it within the organization that you lead, which is Burnett Dairy Cooperative, I think it'd be helpful for me, and probably for many of our listeners, to kind of do a dairy co-op 101, if you will, to get us started. So I wonder if you could maybe just run us through, kind of talk about what the ownership structure of a dairy co-op looks like, the value proposition to member owners, the services you provide, and anything else that you think would be relevant as we sort of and get started here today.
Yeah, so when you think of just a general co-op, it's no different than an ag service cooperative. The dairy side of our cooperative runs the same way. We have right now currently about 60 shareholders on the dairy side that we buy milk from every day. We bring those milk into the plant, separate the components. And for us at Burnett, we're making a cheese product, and that's pretty much all we do. We do concentrate our whey protein up and sell it as a liquid product. And then we sell our, cream components off to a butter manufacturer. So when you look at co-ops in general, a dairy co-op runs the exact same as a full service cooperative. There's not a lot of difference. It's we're unique because we have all the ag services. So we have 60, what we call, quote, dairy members. And then we have about another 120 egg service patrons that use our other side. But the neat thing about here is they all have one vote So if the dairy guys can't sell out the egg service guys, and the egg service guys can't sell out the dairy guys. So it's kind of unique part about our cooperative versus maybe your standard one that most of your listeners are probably know about.
So this one number, one vote, despite being fundamentally different types of members, the ag services versus the dairies, and all having equal representation and not relative to the type of business they have, is that what we would expect to see in most dairy co-ops across the US, or is that something maybe that's unique to you guys?
It's pretty much unique to us. The only one else I could think that's similar to us, but extremely large, is Land O'Lakes. You look at Land O'Lakes where they have, different parts of their business with Winfield and Purina. They have that piece where most co-ops are either egg service co-ops or they're strictly a dairy co-op. I think we're one of the only, if not the only mid-sized cooperative that has everything. So that's the unique part about Burnett. And the cool part is that, if the dairy guys really see some value and maybe there's an opportunity for, a merger or an acquisition, they have the say on the dairy piece. They get to make the decisions on the dairy piece because their vote counts more than egg services, and vice versa. On our egg services side, the egg services side has the vote to expand or sell or what they want to do on that side. So, our board makeup is a little different than most cooperatives. We have to have so many dairy patrons and so many egg service patrons on the board. So we kind of have a unique board setup, and which means we have unique bylaws and everything else that goes along with the co-op.
So with the exception of the Land O'Lakes, if you guys are perhaps among the critical few or perhaps the only that kind of straddle these two sides of the service offering and the value prop, was that an intentional decision that was taken based on a non-consensus view that there's more value here in doing this where others are missing it? Was it a happy accident through M&A or?
No, it's just always been that way. So Burnett's always had both sides. It's not known any different. We're set up in the North Woods of Wisconsin. So we're the part of this northwestern dairy company in the state of Wisconsin. So when you get up to the Northwoods, you don't have anything else. So you got to improvise and add all the services you can.
So it's a product of necessity, perhaps. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And to kind of round out the Co-op 101, and thanks for the kind of groundwork you've laid so far. I don't want to take us too far off track here, but as I understand it, and my understanding is it's elementary at this point. Part of the reason I want to have this discussion today, but my understanding is that the pricing signals and the mechanisms in dairy are substantively different than what you see in the row crop and in specialty ag markets in terms of how prices are set. And you all can't see this, but Matt is chuckling heartily into the camera. So I guess if this is even possible, Matt, how would you summarize the mechanics of milk pricing and kind of how that market is managed? Because I think that's going to be an interesting thing for us to think about in the context of the balance of the conversation. You're not in a market that necessarily is just looking at the board, being a basis trader locally and trying to look at long-term spreads for types of positions you take and where you market your production.
Yeah. So we'll pull it out in two pieces. So the milk portion of what we do here. So purchasing the milk from the dairy farmer. So there's multiple federal orders out there. We sit in Federal Order 30. So there's parameters put in place. And I sent you that little math lesson of how Class 3 is priced, which is
served only to make me feel even worse about my lack of knowledge.
Right. And everybody in the industry's got the same lack of knowledge when it comes to it, because I've never seen the government say, here, I am from the government. I'm here to help. Here's a formula, try to figure it out. And that's kind of what we all do. And co-ops are different on that side of things than your private dairy companies, right? Private dairy companies have to follow Class 3 federal order numbers. So when the federal order price is posted, if they post a $2 butterfat price and a $2 protein price and a 40-cent all other solids price, privates have to follow that formula. Cooperatives, on the other hand, we have the ability to adjust those numbers up and down how we see fit of what we're producing. So that's the unique piece of what we do. So we can say, yeah, Class 3 is $18, but for us right now, Other solids is too high. We don't have an off sale for our other solids, so maybe we'll discount the other solids number. So if federal order says it's 40 cents, we pay 4 cents because that's the value we get out of the other solids. So we can adjust it as a cooperative. The privates cannot do that. They got to follow federal order standards. The other thing we do different here as a cooperative, and this is more Burnett specific than other cooperative specifics, is we focus 100% on the highest quality milk because we make a lot of aged products. So we really focus on somatic cell counts, LPC counts. So, we could age cheese. Some other co-ops are making cheese for either processed cheese or stuff like that, or stuff that's going to be in a deep fryer in 8 days after it's made. They don't have to look at those standards versus how we look at those standards. So that's the milk side of things. So then you get on the whole rest of it. And this goes back to why I was chuckling, because we have all your other components. So whether it's cheese, whether it's butter, whether it's whey protein, all those are actually tradable futures positions. So a guy coming out of the grain business that used to trade grain futures understands the basis piece, the openness of the market. We have all those components that you can trade on the futures position in the dairy world. We don't use them, right? So there's no trading volume. So I can go out today and buy a bunch of class 3 CME block futures and change the market.
We don't use them, meaning the industry.
The dairy industry does not use them at all. We wait for some government calculation, or I always say some guy sitting in a basement in Chicago saying, here's what your cheese value price is today. And I'm going, but I can trade it on my futures, but there's no liquidity in the market, so we can't do it. But we do. They take a poll of 17 cheese companies and their sales of that time, and this is the price you're going to get. I'm like, well, did that companies report their best sale, their worst sale? Did they actually make a sale that just gave the USDA a number, and that's the number we use? And there's no way to see the transparency like you can in trading corns or soybean futures, which is really weird because milk is the only commodity you can do a true crush trade if everybody use it. Like a soybean and corn, you can only trade pieces of that. Where milk, you can trade the milk, you can trade the cheese, you can trade the butter fat, you can trade the protein, all in a futures positions on a CME. But the dairy industry does not use them as the main pricing mechanism. And that's the part I struggle with. And that's usually the part that gets me in trouble when I'm talking to other dairy companies. Like, why do we do so many stupid things in the dairy?
So we think of my question here for a moment, so I can ask it intelligently. So it is not a secret or a unacknowledged opportunity. There's a willful decision to not look at engaging in that type of trading activity at volume to create the liquidity, as you said, for the co-ops and the producers to be able to hedge their risk of their production. Is this resistance born of just inertia and we know the business as it is? Has there been other events in the past that potentially has led some to be gun shy and say, perhaps, we're not ready for this. It's not all upside, Matt. What are your thoughts there? What has been the explanation for why there's less appetite for this?
Well, the number one thing I always get from people I talk to that have been in the industry for a long time is, well, we've always done it this way. That's how it works. Well, that's not a good reason. The other one is a lot of people say, well, we make all kinds of different cheeses. So how could we use a standard pricing mechanism? If I make mozzarella, you make cheddar, I make feta. How can you do that? There's such different standards of what's in there for fat and protein. And my argument to that is, well, we do the same thing with wheat, right? We trade a wheat position with different kinds of wheat, whether that have different kinds of moistures, different kinds of proteins. I said, you could do it, but nobody just wants to take that step and do it. So, I mean, the futures have been around for 20, 30 years, tradable on the CME. And I think some companies, depending on the size of the company, I think they use it for some risk mitigation on the backside, but they do more, over the counter trade. So it stays off the CME, which again, if there's no transparency in that, right? I'd rather see, there's 150,000 trades today because that's what, went through the market. And what we see is there's 5 trades today. So if you think about the cheese volume in the US, How can there only be 5 trades today? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, the other question that comes to mind then is why would the CME as a market maker, as a pooling supply and demand signals and facilitating that price discovery, why would they support these products with such low trading volume and you said introduced several decades ago, but let's I think that would be just going down a path that I'm certainly not qualified to evaluate. So interesting. That'll probably come up again in our conversation today. So the other thing I wanted to ask about is, on the milk supply side. And again, there's a lot of education here, but I've heard about the annual flush that's required on production where there's, demand is simply not there to support. And as you said, you guys are taking deliveries or picking up milk from your milk patrons every day, right? The cows don't take long weekends. They don't take a day off. It's going all the time. And so I think about the supply factors that you're dealing with and there's the demand signals, of course, on the other side, but supply management on the productivity of the herds within your membership base. There's also the growth of those herds themselves. And I'm wondering, does the co-op and your relationship with your patrons have a role in trying to influence member production? Or is it really a matter of everyone freely reacting to market pricing and signals? The reason I ask is within the row crop co-op space, I mean, we're all generally always looking for additional yield and production. But there are times where I think quietly amongst themselves, some executives of these co-ops would probably say, if we could find a way to create a deficit environment here, if people change their planting intentions, if this or that happened, we might be able to have some more attractive opportunities to make the trade. But there's very limited ability to influence that, right? We're influencing for better yield and production and soil health. But I'm wondering, from a co-op perspective, do you guys get involved in the supply management side? Do you have influence there? Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we do. So like for Burnett, we have a quota system. So what we do is we take a producer's last 2-year monthly average. Every year we look at that and say, all right, for your last 2 years, your highest month was 1 million pounds. Say you produced 1 million pounds. So then we'll set a quota for that next year of that's your new quota number is you got to meet 1 million pounds. If you exceed that, that'll be okay. In most environments, a couple of years back, people were selling milk because there wasn't a need for it. So for us, we manage that on a monthly basis, and then we revisit it annually to control kind of the volumes that we need. So the way our rule works is once your quota is set, if you overproduce it and we can use it, you'll get paid your typical class 3 pricing that we use. If you overproduce your quota and we can't use it and we have to sell it, you get whatever we sell the value for. So it's in some markets here a couple of years back, I mean, it was getting to be, $5, $6, $7, $8 a hundredweight below class 3s because there was so much milk. So if we had to sell milk at that point, that's the price you'd get for anything over your quota. So we do manage our milk supply very well. So then, now with the value of cattle, people that are almost thinking of retiring, or maybe I want to retire or retiring. So when that herd leaves, then we have to manage, all right, just like this year, we've added 6 new farms because people have retired. We lost that milk supply, and we want to have 100% of our milk needs on hand all the time. So whatever we need to produce our products, we want to make sure we're buying 100% of it through our patrons. If we have a spike in an order, maybe we'll go out to the market and buy some. But we have such high quality standards, we just can't buy anybody's milk because a lot of it won't meet our standards.
So you said you said 100% of our milk needs. So that is, your milk needs are derived from your offsetting sales commitments with presumably other dairy food manufacturers.
Yeah, we need milk to produce the amount of cheese we've sold. That's our mechanism, right? So we make roughly 60 million pounds of product a year. So we know that we're going to need X amount of milk to do that. So for us, we got to make sure that our farmers are producing at least that amount of milk. If we go over that, then we'll sell it. And sometimes we sell it as a premium. So maybe there'll be a premium come back on some of that. But some 9 times out of 10, it's going to be at a discount because usually somebody else is selling milk and where to get it sold to. You got to play that game a little bit.
So you guys are typically, you're only opportunistically or out of necessity doing onward sales of raw milk. Is that for other dairy co-ops? Do they typically also manufacture cheese as well, or are there some of them simply aggregators of the local supply, and then they're providing that raw milk into other sort of demand channels?
Yeah. So you look at what number 2 Edge Co-op out of Green Bay. They don't own any facilities, right? They're just a mover of milk. So I think they 30, 40 different other suppliers that actually make processes into a product is who they sell it to. So they don't touch a drop. They manage the milk volume through those systems versus co-ops like us that, we have the product because we have the plants. So there's definitely a mix between what co-ops do with their products. And some people, and I've been pushing a little bit on our board here, is to say maybe we should start adding more patrons and become a milk supplier as well to other people that need milk into a system, because then we have a co-op controlling the market on the milk side and taking it out of the maybe what we call the private's hands, so that the farmers got a little bit more say in what they get for a value of their milk.
Certainly. Well, and so to your point, if there's a uniquely high quality profile of your grower's production and that can command a premium in the marketplace, that also allows them to sort of continue to invest in their operations, grow production, and you all become the market maker to find that demand and create that. Because I'm guessing, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong here, Matt, but on the open market for raw milk, I'm guessing those are pretty sticky relationships where folks are not going out and looking for bids on a weekly or monthly basis to meet their next 7 to 30 day demand. You probably are looking at long-term relationships.
Yeah, most of those milk contracts are like a year-long contract. Like we'll go out and some of the people that buy from us will say, all right, I need 5 loads a day for a year. So you make a contract for that. So it's not like they're calling you every day to say, hey, do you have milk today? I need some. Yeah, there's not a lot of companies that can afford to do that, because that means you're trying to figure out, should I make cheese today or should I make some sort of commodity out of the raw milk? You wouldn't last very long in the industry if you're doing it that way.
Very good. Well, let's obviously continue talking dairy, but we'll move past that. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about your business is just the multiple components of value in the raw material. And you teed that up for us very well, talking about some of the milk components. Now, in any business, and particularly in ag, I think there's always the opportunity for us to either overlook cost leakage or value leakage in how we're handling raw materials, and miss the opportunities that might be sitting right in plain sight to derive more value from that and capture that. And a lot of that comes from just simply disaggregating the raw material, understanding its component parts might have more value than it in its current state. In the soybean complex, that's very obvious. Folks that understand what the meal is worth, what the oil is worth, what the other byproducts are worth, and how they're going to handle that, what they're going to trade on that. And the fun thing the last couple of years has been watching the bean oil relationship sort of get turned on its head, where suddenly the value is in the oil, where it used to be you just wanted to do everything you could to get the meal, and you'd figure out what to do with the oil. And now that's somewhat equalized. Now, for you guys, as you said, that's breaking down the raw milk into, I think you said, butter fat and the protein and lactose and the variety of other products. How do you look at component management, though, in your role at Burnett, both operationally in the business, but also economically? And what opportunities does that maybe or has that created for Burnett? And then taking kind of close examination of that.
Yeah. So when I got into, again, I didn't grow up in the dairy cooperative world. I've got all of 4 years of experience here. But one thing I have done in my career is understanding, and I like to really dumb things down. So everybody buys a widget. If you're a manufacturer, I don't care if you're a steel manufacturer making a product, a milk manufacturer, it doesn't matter. You're starting out with a one raw widget, so to speak. So for us, it's milk. So we don't really buy fluid milk. We buy the components within the fluid milk, right? So we're bringing those components in, we're separating those components, and we're making products. what was fascinating to me, and then it's not just a Burnett issue, it's a dairy system issue. A lot of people just bring it in, make their product, and there they go. My question has been since I got here is, if we're bringing 1 million to 1.2 million pounds of milk in a day, where did the 1.2 million pounds of product go at the end of the day? And that's what the system, and not just us, it's a lot of the systems are lacking that knowledge. So what we've done here is we invested in a lot of flow meters and test ports, and every pipe's got a monitor on it now to tell me what's flowing through it, how fast, how much, and then I know what's in there. So when milk comes in today, I know where everything's going down, even if it's going down the drain. Some stuff just goes down the drain. But prior to all of our investments in that technology, we didn't know where it was going. It's like, well, why is there so much leakage on protein? Why is there so much leakage on fat? I bought this many pounds, but I'm only ending up with this many pounds at the end of the day. Where did it all go? So now we understand down to every penny of what we purchase, where it goes. And yes, some falls into your wastewater. Well, because there's things we can do with wastewater to re-pull it back out of there before it goes into a wastewater facility. So I think for us, and I think for the industry, I think people are starting to see that if you can get every component that you paid for and bring value to those components back to the dairy itself, which all that means is that the farmer's going to get paid a little bit more, because now you understand what you bought from them and what you can return back in value.
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
As you said, I'm getting from you that this is a journey and the industry is on it. I don't necessarily know that flow meters and test ports are a novel new technology. Has it perhaps been from the manufacturers and the folks that are developing the technology that dairy wasn't a primary place they went to look, and so maybe the application of existing technology just lagged? Or again, was there sometimes there's a desire just to keep things simple, right? Like if I'm gonna install those monitors, now I got to manage those monitors, and I got to do something with that information. And so,
right. And that's the big push for me is like, why wouldn't you want to? As a guy that's run different types of businesses, not just dairy, to me, it's more about if I have to pay $1 for something, I want to know where my dollar went. I just don't want to pay $1 for something and I got 25 cents left at the end of the day, and I don't know why. And that's how I look at this. So yeah, flow meters, testing ports, not new. There's a lot of them in a lot of places, but are we utilizing them to make the system better? That's what we've done here. I mean, we've got a system now when milk goes to the vat deck to start your cheese process. I mean, that milk is being tested every 3 seconds. So I know how much fat, how much protein is in that, so that if our cheesemaker says, I need this fat and this protein component, he punches it in, and that thing is keeping that just perfect. Prior to me coming here, we literally had a dial on a wall 10 steps down from the top of the vat deck that they would adjust it when they started, and it takes about 45 minutes to fill a vat. You're supposed to adjust that and test it constantly. Well, my joke is always, are you telling me you've tested that for every vat? We make 24 vats a day, so that means you'd have to run up and down that steps, 40 times if you're adjusting it. Now we're adjusting it every 3 seconds. So now our standardization and our quality is consistent because you don't have to run up and down a set of 10 steps. And so, but there's still a lot of industry that still has the hand dial, which I just think is crazy, because every ounce of extra fat you throw in your cheese that you don't need, that you can sell as sweet cream, it's just money that you're losing. And that's the system that we're trying to build here. And I think for us, it made sense to start knowing exactly what our cost was. You can't take expenses out of the system if you don't know what you're losing. So that's kind of how we viewed this.
Well, I think there's a second part of that. I mean, you said that you got to know what your costs are, and then you need to know why your costs are, right? And I think about that, and there's these stories from, I don't remember which of, I think it was probably SpaceX, from Musk's sprawling empire, where they basically were, and I'm going to get this completely wrong, but effectively playing with different types of gaskets or valves or something like that, and trying to figure out who could make it. And someone said they could probably have a prototype for them in 18 months because it's for aeronautical space applications, and they jerry-rigged something based that was bought at a local hardware store at the Home Depot. And then that sort of sets in motion the idea of understanding the raw material cost, the products that you're purchasing. What's the cost of manufacturing and fabricating? What do we gain by being able to do it ourselves and rapidly iterate? And that's all sort of going from the other thing of, how do we create what we want? In this case, what you're talking about is how do we understand the value of what we have and where are we leaking value in the system, right? And this growth in an agribusiness is not just incremental growth through new customers, new volume, new territories, new products. And it's certainly not just slashing costs out of the system. Sometimes it's just looking, I just want to understand at a very detailed level, what is the status quo? What is the true cost of operating the business? Where are those costs and why are those costs? And I think this is a great example of saying, look, we need to make some technology investments. We need to make some infrastructure investments. I'm imagining that there was a lot of employee training that was required to get folks to, everyone's excited not to run up and down the stairs, but not everybody can troubleshoot if something is getting an error reading on an interface, right? So, but it does sort of say, look, we could make these investments, change very little in our physical production, but now have the huge benefit of visibility and knowledge about what's happening within our plant.
Yeah, that's the cool part, is that it doesn't have to, it's not a dairy thing, right? It's a manufacturing thing, no matter what you're manufacturing or what, it goes all the way back to the farm. It goes, planting populations. Can I grow more if I plant less? And, there's so many things. If you don't know what you don't know, you can't fix it. And for us in the dairy, there was just a lot of things that we didn't know. We just didn't know where it went. And the answer was, well, probably went to wastewater. I'm like, well, maybe we should be selling wastewater instead of selling our product, because it might be more value in our wastewater than what we know. And that's kind of what the joke is around here. It's like, well, Matt's putting another system in to check what's in his wastewater because he thinks there's something hidden gem in there. And lo and behold, there actually is. We've been pretty fortunate here to get some grant money through the Series of Dairy Research. We found a lot of cool products in our wastewater to where now we're focusing on that. And I think what it does is, because I'm not from the space, right? I'm asking the question, why? Why do we do that? Why aren't we doing that? Is there a better way to do that? And where can we find some more value out of the products that we get?
And real value in new set of eyes, right? That's come to bear here. Well, I do think separately, if you, between these two strategies of, are we going to become a sort of a top shelf wastewater provider to market participants, or are we going to become a premium sort of milk supply, you might need to pick a lane. That's going to be two hard things to sell at the same time. As we can sell you the best milk in the industry and the richest wastewater. I'm going to want assurance that those two things are coming out of different pipes.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's talk. So that's a lot on the supply side and the components. Let's talk about just state of demand for fluid milk. So I believe, but may be wrong. I've heard many times that the demand for fluid milk is continuing to decline. And I've also, maybe this is also getting falsely commingled with U.S. consumers just basically drink less milk than they maybe did a couple of decades ago. And maybe that's also false. And I'm fine to be wrong with that.
No,
I hear all that, but then there's also this significant build out of dairy product, namely cheese infrastructure across the U.S. Billions of dollars of new plants being brought online.
Yeah,
we know we have
billion.
11 billion. Okay,
Last year, yeah.
And we also have a very bullish market for some of the specialty sort of derivative products, right? We know as we sit here in the first half of 2026, everyone's everyone's got to get their protein, right? So the whey protein, the casein, the isolates, the concentrates to meet the domestic market. I also know that the U.S. is a big supplier to inclusions for baby formula around the world, particularly where there's still population growth. So we get this kind of like this mixed picture. So what's going on here, Mac? Is there or has there been, in fact, any sort of demand softening? And if there is, how does a co-op sort of react to those shifts?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. The fluid milk demand, in the 70s, we're drinking like 29 gallons of milk per person in the 70s. So now we're down to 16 gallons of milk as a consumption rate on just raw milk. So, but what's happening is 2024 was actually the first time we've actually seen a little increase of that number. So it did move up, and that has a lot to do with, the school program. Back in the 80s and 90s, we took all the good milk out of the system and only could get skim milk or 1% in the school. All that's coming back in. So that's the reason for that fluid milk side of things coming back up. But yeah, the demand for all the pieces and components out of milk. So you think of all the ready to drink, shelf stable. Fairlife is a perfect example of product. Now you could just buy your milk off the grocery store shelf and not in the cooler, which is really weird, right? Anybody that's
it is.
Yeah. I literally could buy it in a box on shelf next to the cereal aisle. So it's just kind of a weird thing to look at. But I mean, it's a market now that's just we just spent the last week at the International Dairy Expo out in Milwaukee. And the word protein, if it was said 1 million times, it was probably said 20 million times out there, because that's all the focus is now, is how can we get protein, whether it's in drinks, snacks, powders, whatever. That's what everybody wants. So that demand we hit $11 a pound for protein on the protein side of things. It's like $11, historically $2, $3 is was the magic number for whey protein. Now it hit $11. It's hard to even believe. And for most of us that are just cheese manufacturers that just have that cheese piece, if it wasn't for that, we probably wouldn't be making any money, because the protein piece is what we're selling the most value out of the plant. So yeah, for us it's how do you pivot? The problem today is we can't just put a dryer in to make whey protein, because the cost to put a dryer in is $30, $40, $50 million to build out a system like that. So unless you had planned to do this years ago, or you've done it since you started and kept up with keeping your plants in shape, which the co-op industry has done a really poor job at that versus the privates, it's hard to pivot into something else. So what we've done at Burnett is we found strategic partnerships and other co-ops that maybe have that technology. So we'll say, hey, can we make some agreements between one another where we'll supply our protein to you, you convert it, and you make these other products out of it. So we can bring a good value back to the farmer's farm. So for us, it's just, you got to pivot, but you can't pivot fast enough because of industry trends. They change quickly, and the cost to change with it sometimes is hard, especially for co-ops. You got to remember, we're a nonprofit company, right? I always teach everybody in the co-op world, don't make too much money, don't lose too much money, but make sure you give me a good dividend check. That's standard across all co-ops. So
I would argue that a nonprofit is a tax treatment, not a business model. And so you still print those numbers and then distribute accordingly. It's just how they're going to be taxed. But that's another conversation. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously, to start the process of constructing and commissioning and then operating a dryer in service of drying out the whey and being able to sell that into this very rich demand market right now, you may participate in that, but you may also only participate in the very end of that boom, right? And so to your point, it's folks that maybe made those investments 20 years ago or 15 years ago, where now they're able to amortize those costs over, a significant amount of volume and values returned back. So that makes sense. But it raises an interesting topic here, and that's, so absent that example, your website states that you are a vertically integrated cooperative, and I quote, involved in every step from soil maintenance to animal health to making and shipping cheese, which is what you've talked about here today. I you're operating all the divisions that a conventional row crop co-op would: agronomy, nutrition, grain, and energy. But in the context of the quote unquote money left on the table because you can't dry away, for example, you can only make certain types of cheese products that maybe are more in demand or have a higher premium right now, or whatever it might be. I'm just wondering, as you look ahead and want to meet producer needs, but also create the most enterprise value that can then be redistributed over time back to those members, how do you think about diversification, further diversification within the co-op, Matt? And it could be services, it could be products, precision ag, risk management solutions, farm succession service. I don't know, but how are you kind of considering diversification? I'm not asking for your strategy, of course, here on a recorded mic, but what role does that play? Or is it really through partnerships, as you just talked about? That's a strategy too.
Yeah, I think for us right now, we do have a lot of services. We do provide a lot, but yeah, I think there's right now, I always look at succession and retirement, because you got to remember our farmers aging out pretty quickly. So could we help with that? Financing. So there's a big piece that, so you start to see some co-ops have that financing piece of, hey, we could also be your line of credit provider. So we do some of that as well. Just different things like that on that side. I think for us, since we're so, we are a dairy cooperative that has egg services, but the egg services is 1/3 of our total business versus the dairy side. I think the dairy side, industry wise, we can bring more value with not spending a lot of money, is finding those other secret components in milk. I think milk is a powerful product, and there's a lot of really cool small pieces in there that we're not pulling out of it, that we can bring enormous value to our farmers and into the industry. So for us, that's the diversification we're looking at now, is if we brought milk in, can we just separate like every protein molecule down to the molecule, so that we can say, all right, we don't even make anything anymore. We just filter everything out and sell these little pieces off. So that's kind of where we're focused on. And I think for diversification, you have to figure out the next. Think about it. It wasn't 20 years ago, we were dumping all of our whey onto the fields, right? Now, if you dumped your whey on the field, you wouldn't make any money, and people think you're crazy because there's so much value in it. So what's the next value proposition that's coming on the dairy industry? That's where we're focusing. We have a really good relationship with the Dairy for Dairy Research, trying to find, is there a mineral that we can pull out of it? Is there a magic bullet that's in there that could, cure cancer or do something like that that's totally different than what the industry is doing? I think there's other companies doing the same thing, right? There's a lot of value in milk, that there's more value than just making cheese, because for us, we're competing against somebody that's, making, 800 million pounds of cheese a year, and we're making 60, right? So we have to figure out, what other pieces of that milk product that we're buying can we make value on. So for us, that's what we focus on for diversification, is product diversification. And member services, we have almost everything. We bought some drones so we could spray these small fields in the Northwoods with drones instead of 120-foot booms, because all you do is rip off 120-foot booms, right? So we can fly a couple drones out in the field and get just as much done in a day, and spend $50,000 on a machine instead of $500,000. So I think for us, we have a lot of diversification already, and our joke in the boardroom is we have so much diversification, we're always losing money somewhere in one of those diversified pieces. So, and that's the struggle. Diversification is good, but there's a cost to it, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the through lines I'm taking there is, and from several things you said today, it's oftentimes the byproduct becomes the product, right? That has happened for these large manufacturers of cheese, of course, that now are sort of making margin on whey, and that's really fueling a lot of the growth and the reinvestment, and of course cheese demand is growing up into the right as well. But when you have that creative look at the business that you own and say, okay, if the byproduct has become the product over time, and we've already had a lot of progress in identifying the fractional component value of the milk components, as you said, what else might we be able to monetize in this process? Because I think left undone, and I'm not speaking ill of the large dairy food and cheese manufacturers. We've done some work in the cheese manufacturing space, right? So a lot of respect for the rigor of their investments and their strategy and what they're trying to accomplish. But there can be a tendency that if all the sophistication of the things you're talking about, if all the sophistication resides within the large privates, an excess portion of the value will then accrue to those organizations. And having someone like yourself that's sitting within a smaller organization that's thinking creatively about this, willing to make investments to identify, to measure, and then ultimately to monetize it. One, it drives a lot of innovation within the smaller profile organizations, which is great. But you have a quicker feedback loop to the U.S. grower, in this case, the U.S. dairyman. And I think that's a really important thing. And so I would just ask you to keep it up, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, like I said, not coming from the dairy space, I think it helps it. We make a joke around here. When I first came, again, coming out of the grain world, we have all this lactose that's just going back to the farmer's feed. And I'm like, wait a minute, lactose is a C12 sugar. Why can't we split it back into a C6 and make ethanol or make jet fuel or make even if we could make our cleaning products for cleaning our plant, why wouldn't we do that?
Right.
And you would have thought I just landed from Mars, because they're like, wait a minute, what? You're going to fly a jet across the country on cheese lactose? I'm like, absolutely we are. So why wouldn't we try it? So I think those are the things coming into the dairy industry, not being in the dairy industry, really has helped our cooperative view things differently than maybe other people that have been in it for 40 years. And again, people that have been in it for 40 years, I try to attach myself to that group of people because they know so much, because they were the people that found value in a byproduct. And what we've really tried to done around here is quit saying byproduct and say co-product, because we feel a lot of these products are co-valued to the product that we're already making. But yeah, just keep focusing on the weird stuff. Like, that's what I like to say. Find something different.
Well, you need both, right? You need the industry veterans, because they do know why things exist as they are. They do know what works or what has worked historically. And then you need the folks that aren't afraid to ask the dumb questions, because they know that eventually they're going to ask a question that isn't really so dumb. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you for taking the time to join us today. It's been a nice, different business profile for us to look at, some different mechanics and challenges to consider. I certainly enjoyed it, and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Exactly. And thank you, Joe, for the work you're doing. I know your podcast, I've been forwarding to our board every time I hear a good one, because I think you're bringing value back to us. It's not fun sitting in the CEO seat of some co-ops all the time, but hearing other CEOs of no matter what type of co-op talk about how boards can be better, how management can be better, that value is just priceless for us. So I know that I truly appreciate it. Some of our staff members that know you personally, they appreciate it. So just keep up the good work.
Will do. And thank you for the feedback. And to those other co-op GMs that are out there listening, if you want to be in the hot seat, we don't do open invitations usually on the show. We maybe should do a better job of that, but you're the folks we want to talk to. And so, you can find a link to reach out to me in the show notes. You can find me on LinkedIn. And, we'd love to hear from people who want to talk on mic is great, but even want to talk off mic and share some perspectives. That's always welcome as well. And we'll close there with that. And to our listeners, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you being a part of the Pacesetter Pod community and taking time to listen in and consider ways to turn strategy into outcomes in your agribusiness. We never take your time for granted. Appreciate you joining and look forward to having join us next time right here on the Pacesetter Pod.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.